Hello everyone. So, with all this coronavirus malarkey going on, I'm in a bit of a tight squeeze situation. My time is, shall we say, sliced into tiny pieces. I'm now working a full-time job, looking after my kid all day, being a teacher, and being a part-time, above-average YouTuber. It's tough, I'll put it that way, and it's only been a week from the point I'm writing this. But I want to try and keep the channel running smoothly, like a freshly shaven Mo Farah, so I've been thinking of ways to put things together quickly. When it comes to editing and such, that typically takes the longest amount of time, but I can do that in spurts for the most part. When it comes to writing, recording and playing games though, I kind of need to be undisturbed while I do it, and I'm pretty much disturbed every 14 minutes of the minute. What better way to fill a video-sized hole than to celebrate a random number of subscribers and pretend that this was the plan all along by having a Q&A, because then it means I can not have to play a game and just make a video. There is no better way, so here I am. Welcome to a Fireside chat with RoseTintedLockdown. Carlos Morale is a YouTuber who you may or may not have heard of, but you should hear of him because his videos are a lovely mixture of Sunshine on a Rainy Day by Zoe and Ironic by Alanis Morissette. He does videos about all sorts of things, as long as those things are video games. He asks the following important question. In the heart of Transylvania, in the Vampire Hall of Fame, is there a vampire zanier than Duckula? You know, I've thought long and hard about this, and I don't actually think there is a vampire zanier than Count Duckula. For one thing, right, it's a kid's cartoon that features a pretty heavy amount of occult imagery. It's about a dynasty of vampires who also happen to be ducks. It's voiced by David Jason, among others. It's a kid's show that revolves around horror tropes. I'll get it! Steve Hill on the Patreon asked, did you ever write your own games on the Specky? That's a good question, Steve Hill on the Patreon. I got my Spectrum when I was quite young, definitely before the age of 7, probably put it around 5 years old. Back then, the only thing I cared about was games. Games. I also probably couldn't type that well, so fast forward until about the age of 8. A neighbour moved away to university and he left me a huge pile of Spectrum-related things, a big box of games and a few coding manuals. The coding manuals probably sat under the bed for at least another 2 years or so before I eventually started to look at them. And this is probably the first time I realised that you could actually code with a Spectrum. So after reading through a bit, I came across some example code. It was roughly 900 pages long and written in size 2 font, probably in Comic Sans, and I spent an entire day typing this up painstakingly, making sure not to make any mistakes whatsoever. I made 2 mistakes. One of them was a coding error, of course, because this was the first time I tried anything like this, and mistakes were just something you did when you typed code for 19 hours straight. But the other mistake was that I'd misread what I was typing out. I thought I was typing out a game, but in actual fact, it was a disappointing animation. So after finishing this and running the code, what I was supposed to see was a giant alien mothership flying in from the left, hovering over a building, blowing it up, then moving on to the right. What I actually saw was a garbled mess of blocks shunting sporadically right, then another garbled mess of blocks happening somewhere at the bottom of the screen, and then it crashed, and I lost all the code I'd written. I was supposed to be watching the Spectrum equivalent of Independence Day, but it ended up being the Spectrum equivalent of stomach poisoning. I never tried again after that, although these days I probably have a little more patience than I did as a kid. Maybe one day. Capital H, lowercase d, uppercase E, and his lovely retro gaming channel are next. And if you've not seen any of his videos, then you should go and watch them, because he is a sea of calm in a world of screamy anguish. He asked, light gun games, yay or nay? Personally, I really enjoy light gun games. I think my favourite out of all of them though was Point Blank in the arcade and then converted on the PS1. It was basically the Bishi Bashi special of light gun games, and if you don't know what Bishi Bashi special is, it's the Takeshi's Castle of video games, and if you don't know what Takeshi's Castle is, it's the Jeremy Beadle of television game shows. Point Blank just mixed it all up completely. Light gun games are fine, but they can drag on. There's really only a set amount of time I can play them before I get bored, but because Point Blank throws up game after game after game, all with different objectives and art styles and everything else, it just felt fresh, and it still feels fresh now. I'd love the series to get a revival, but I feel like light gun games have died a death this generation. Maybe they're due a comeback. Also, with me not having a CRT monitor, one of the main reasons I keep a Wii knocking about the house is so I can play light gun games still. Ghost Squad on the Wii is still really good fun, and if you haven't played it, a Wii costs about 40p these days, so do yourself a favour. Jonathan Nicholson, Twitter's favourite Jammy Dodger addict, asks, what inspired you to start making videos on YouTube, and what has been the biggest learning curve in it all? Another good question, and quite a bit to answer with this one. In terms of what inspired me to get started, it's a bit of a long story, but the main reason was to basically dig myself out of an anxiety hole. A few years ago, my mother was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer. Chances of survival were extremely low, and they weren't even sure they could operate. But they did, and to cut a long story short, she's still with us now and doing very well. I could not be more proud of her. I didn't cope with the situation. Not that I really knew it. It had to be pointed out to me numerous times by people around me before I realised that actually, no, I wasn't coping at all. I was irritable beyond belief. I was worried about things that didn't matter. I was making rash decisions about things without really contemplating the consequences, such as telling my boss that I hated my job and wanted to leave now, and then the next day realising that I didn't want to leave and I was being mental. I was having panic attacks and night terrors, and it's the first time in my life that I realised I wasn't me, and the scary thing was that I didn't realise I wasn't me until somebody else told me. It's a difficult thing to truly get across to people who've never experienced it. So I got the help I needed, I took the medication, then I gave up on the medication, then I relapsed, then I took the medication again, and now, finally, over the past 7 months or so, I've been a lot better. I can look back at the time and see with great clarity now that I was being a complete nana, but I still had the anxiety hovering over my head. It felt like I'd come back through from the other side, but I wanted to smash through the ceiling. So what better way than to put myself out there? I wanted to do it for years and never had, but I don't know. I felt like if I could get past this last couple of years, then I could do whatever the hell I bloody well liked, so I did. And I was honestly surprised by the initial response, especially looking back now. I picked a subject, I bought a microphone for 15 quid and I just jumped in feet first. I still get just as nervous releasing a video now as I did when I released that first one, but each time I press that submit button it feels like I'm opening up another window. It's helped me to take criticism better, it's helped me to focus on something when my mind wanders, it's helped me to see that I can do something creatively that others enjoy, and prior to this I just assumed that everything I did was a half-assed mess. I mean it is, but it's a mildly successful half-assed mess, and that's a beautiful thing to see happen. In terms of the learning curve, I didn't know how to do any of this stuff before I started. I'd never used Photoshop or video editing tools outside of just faffing around with them for a bit, because my ability to learn is strictly limited by my attention span. I need to have a reason to do something in order to learn it. That's just how my brain's built. So when I'm making a video, I typically think to myself, right, this video is going to have this in it and that in it, and it's going to explode, and there's going to be 1,000 extras in it, and I'm going to literally levitate off the floor. And then I go off and hunt down tutorials on how to do all that, and I realise that actually 1,000 extras and the ability to levitate off the floor are probably quite impractical. I probably can't do that. I'll just go with the explosion. It's taught me that having 1,000 ideas a minute is fine, but I can only go as far as my technical limits can take me, and learning how to push those technical limits is fun for me because it directly leads to a product that others can enjoy. Private Idaho, if that is his real name, on Twitter asks, do you have a favourite Spectrum loading scheme, and what's the weirdest Specky game you've enjoyed? If by loading scheme you mean the sound, I like the one that goes but if you mean loading screens, I have a few I really like. Most recently, I'd have to go with Robocop because it's just stunning, but the one that always sticks out in my mind as a kid is the original Dizzy. It was the first game that I remember being vividly enamoured with, and the loading screen pretty much sums up exactly how I felt about it. There's Dizzy, stood on a cliff top, looking out over this vast landscape, a castle in the distance. To me, as a kid, I was that egg-shaped monstrosity. I was there, looking out, ready to explore. Prior to this game, the stuff I'd played was relatively simple, but Dizzy felt like a huge leap forward. As far as weird specky games I've enjoyed, I absolutely adore Motus, and on the face of it, the premise is pretty weird. I think I referred to it as a bumper cars in space during my review, and that's pretty much it. It's still an absolute joy to play even now, and it also gives me an excuse to play the intro music again, which is amazing. Outside of that though, I think the Spectrum is absolutely packed with weird games. Most games for the Spectrum are weird because the development scene was so Wild West. There weren't as many money men pitching the same game ideas over and over again, so you ended up with such an eclectic mix of wildly different ideas. Not all of them were great, and let's be honest, the vast majority of them are practically unplayable, but it's one of the main reasons I picked the Spectrum to focus on. Not only was it my first computer, it also had a software library that is incredibly interesting to delve into and talk about. It feels like a computer in a microcosm. It was released at the forefront of home gaming, it allowed you to make your own games, it was huge in the UK and Europe, so a lot of the English language games have a very British personality. There wasn't a huge back catalogue of games to work off, so everyone was just kind of making things up as they went along. It's a time that'll never be replicated again, so it's a good era to explore, laugh at, enjoy, and otherwise investigate. Stu the Adventure Brummie used his Twitter account to ask a question that technically isn't a question because it doesn't have a question mark at the end, and it isn't formed like a question, but I'm going to answer it anyway because I'm nice like that. He says, the best Dizzy game is... and I would say Terminator Dizzy.
That's Italian. You can go pump or auto.
The 45 long slide with laser sighting.
These are brand new. We just got them in. That's a good gun. You just touch the trigger, the beam comes on, and you put the red dot where you want the bullet to go. You can't miss. Anything else?
The Uzi 9mm.
You know your weapons, buddy. Any one of these is ideal for home defense. So, which will it be?
All.
I may close early today. Found the handguns, but the rifles you can take right now. You can't do that.
Wrong.
Yes?
And lastly, Spectrum Nez, who you may remember from the Games That Made Us feature, where we specifically talked about games, so you would think that he would ask a question about games, asked the most important question of them all: why, after all these years, is the chicken and mushroom pot noodle still the best? And the reason for that is so that anyone who buys any other flavour of pot noodle other than chicken and mushroom gets put on a list. And when they build a new Australia, they'll all be shipped off there like the reprobates they are. Beef and tomato, you sick bastard.